Picture this, 1904, the Russo-Japanese War is raging. Russia, to everyone's surprise, is getting a jolly good thrashing. Enter Tsar Nicholas II, a man of boundless confidence in his own terrible judgment. With the air of someone ordering a takeaway rather than deciding the fate of a nation, Nicky Boy decides to send the Baltic Fleet to the Pacific. A grand gesture, you might think, except for one tiny detail. The Baltic Fleet was, shall we say, not exactly the pride of the Imperial Navy. They were more accustomed to the icy calm of the Baltic Sea than the rather more unpredictable Pacific Ocean. Sending them on an 18,000-mile voyage to confront a modern Japanese fleet, it was like entering a geriatric tortoise in the Grand National. The Tsar, however, remained optimistic. Or perhaps he'd just lost his last pair of spectacles. Whatever the reason, the die was cast, and the Baltic Fleet set sail on a voyage that would become the stuff of legend. Or perhaps more accurately, the stuff of music hall farce. Now, dear reader, let's have a gander at this formidable armada. Leading the charge was the flagship, Knyaz Suvorov, a battleship so ancient it probably remembered the dinosaurs. Following closely behind was a ragtag assortment of cruisers, destroyers, and other assorted rust buckets, held together by hope, prayer, and a good lick of paint. Among them was a squadron affectionately dubbed the Sink by Themselves Squadron. Why this charming moniker? Well, let's just say their seaworthiness was somewhat suspect. Imagine a fleet of bathtub toys being piloted by enthusiastic but utterly clueless toddlers. You're starting to get the picture. Adding to the air of impending disaster was the crew. A motley bunch scraped from the bottom of the naval barrel. They were more familiar with vodka than naval warfare, and their navigation skills were, to put it politely, somewhat underdeveloped. This, my friends, was a recipe for disaster. And oh boy, what a disaster it would turn out to be. As the Baltic Fleet embarked on its epic journey, a strange affliction began to grip the crew. It was a highly contagious condition known as Japanese-induced paranoia. Every ripple in the water, every passing seagull, was mistaken for an attack by the cunning Japanese Navy. Gunners would spontaneously combust into a frenzy of panicked gunfire at the slightest provocation. Once, a particularly excitable lookout mistook a pod of whales for Japanese torpedo boats. The ensuing chaos nearly caused a diplomatic incident with a passing flock of albatrosses. Whispers of Japanese spies and saboteurs lurking aboard spread like wildfire. The ship's cat became an object of suspicion. The cook was nearly thrown overboard for adding too much wasabi to the captain's dinner. The paranoia reached fever pitch. It was a wonder the fleet didn't simply sink itself before ever reaching the Pacific. And then, dear reader, came the piece de resistance of the Baltic Fleet's misadventures, the Dogger Bank incident. Picture it, a dark and stormy night in the North Sea. The Baltic Fleet, already a quivering mass of nerves, mistook a group of harmless British fishing trawlers for, you guessed it, the Japanese fleet. What followed was a scene of utter mayhem. Guns blazed, shells whistled through the air, and terrified fishermen ran for their lives. The Sink by Themselves Squadron lived up to its name, nearly colliding with each other in the confusion. The whole debacle lasted a good 20 minutes before someone, presumably after tripping over a stray samovar, realized they were firing upon unarmed civilians. The fleet limped away, leaving a trail of bewildered fishermen, slightly singed nets, and international outrage in their wake. Section 5. The World's Longest Detour. The Dogger Bank incident, unsurprisingly, didn't exactly endear the Baltic Fleet to the rest of the world. The British, understandably miffed at having their fishing industry mistaken for a naval target, threatened all sorts of nasty repercussions. To appease the British Lion, and avoid an embarrassing diplomatic incident, the fleet was forced to take the scenic route to the Pacific. And by scenic, I mean a rather tedious detour around the entire continent of Africa. This unplanned African safari only added to the fleet's woes. Supplies dwindled, morale plummeted, and the ships began to resemble floating zoos. It was a voyage that tested the limits of human endurance, patience, and the structural integrity of poorly maintained warships. Section 6. A floating circus of the bizarre. Life aboard the Baltic Fleet was never dull. It was, in many ways, a microcosm of Russia itself, chaotic, unpredictable, and prone to outbreaks of spontaneous absurdity. For instance, did I mention the exotic pets? The sailors, in a desperate attempt to alleviate the boredom, had adopted a veritable menagerie during their stopovers. Monkeys swung from the rigging, parrot squawked nautical commands, and a particularly mischievous goat developed a fondness for chewing on the ship's flags. Then there was the food, or rather, the lack thereof. The ship's stores had long since dwindled to a few moldy biscuits and some suspiciously pungent meat. Rumors abounded that the meat was, in fact, the unfortunate ship's doctor who had mysteriously disappeared after a particularly nasty bout of seasickness. Section 7. Mutiny, Misfires, and Approaching Doom. As the Baltic Fleet finally limped into the Pacific, they were a shadow of their former selves. The ships were held together by barnacles and wishful thinking. The crew, driven mad by months of paranoia and bad food, were on the verge of mutiny. Their gunnery practice, never a high point, had descended into farce. Shells exploded prematurely, missed their targets by miles, or simply refused to leave the barrels. It was like watching a particularly inept fireworks display. Still, they pressed on towards their destiny, a collection of floating disasters on a collision course with history. Little did they know that the Japanese, far from being terrified by their approach, were eagerly awaiting their arrival. Section 8. Tsushima, the anticlimactic end of a farcical journey. The Battle of Tsushima, when it finally arrived, was less a battle and more a massacre. The Japanese fleet, modern, efficient, and led by the brilliant Admiral Togo, made short work of the lumbering Russian behemoths. The Baltic Fleet, outmaneuvered, outgunned, and frankly out of luck, put up a brave but ultimately futile fight. Ships sank, exploded, or simply capsized from sheer exhaustion. The sink-by-themselves squadron, true to their name, did just that, much to the astonishment of the Japanese. The Battle of Tsushima was a humiliating defeat for Russia, a testament to their hubris, incompetence, and the perils of sending a fleet of geriatric tortoises to fight a pack of hungry sharks. And so ended the farcical journey of the Baltic Fleet, a tale of mishaps, misadventures, and military blunders that would be told and retold for generations to come. The moral of the story, dear reader? Always check the ship's biscuits before embarking on a long voyage.